Call me a gossip if you will. But when even the most arrogant lords tremble before this tongue, it is because someone with immense power, harbors secrets too filthy to see the light of any salon. I am Lady Vesper Blackthorn, and dear listeners, they tried to buy me. Their mistake? Assuming I had a price. In the shadow-draped corners of Grosvenor Square, where gaslight flickers against marble facades and secrets seep through velvet curtains like morning mist, there exists a truth so devastating that empires have trembled at its mere suggestion. Tonight, as crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the opulent ballroom of Whitmore House, I invite you to witness the unraveling of a conspiracy that reaches the very pinnacle of British society. The autumn of 1847 had settled over London like a shroud of amber silk, and the Whitmore estate stood as a monument to centuries of accumulated wealth and carefully buried scandals. Lady Vesper Blackthorn moved through the grand foyer with the calculated grace of a predator, her emerald silk gown rustling against the imported Italian marble floors. Each step echoed with purpose. Each glance carried the weight of knowledge that could topple governments. The evening's soirée was no ordinary gathering. Beneath the facade of elegant conversation and refined entertainment, the most powerful figures in England had assembled for a purpose known only to a select few. The Duke of Ashworth, resplendent in his midnight blue velvet coat adorned with the Order of the Garter, stood near the towering windows that overlooked the manicured gardens. His steely grey eyes, usually so commanding in Parliament, now darted nervously across the assembled guests. Lady Vesper approached the refreshment table, where crystal decanters filled with the finest French cognac caught the light from the massive chandeliers above. The air was thick with the scent of white roses and the subtle fragrance of expensive perfumes imported from the continent. Conversations flowed in hushed tones, punctuated by the gentle tinkling of champagne glasses and the rustle of silk gowns. Lady Blackthorn, came a voice smooth as aged whiskey from behind her. She turned to find Lord Edmund Hartwell, the Queen's own confidant, his perfectly waxed mustache unable to hide the tension in his jaw. How unexpected to see you here this evening. Vesper's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. Is it Lord Hartwell? I was under the impression that truth, like fine wine, becomes more valuable with age. And I do so enjoy vintage revelations. The orchestra, positioned on the mezzanine overlooking the ballroom, began a waltz by Strauss. Couples glided across the polished parquet floors, their movements a choreographed dance of power and influence. Yet beneath the elegant facade, something far more sinister was unfolding. Lady Margaret Ashworth, the Duke's wife, approached with measured steps, her diamond tiara catching the light with each movement. Her pale blue eyes, usually so serene in their aristocratic composure, now held a glimmer of desperation. Lady Blackthorn, perhaps we might have a word in private? Vesper's fan snapped open with a practiced flick of her wrist, revealing intricate ivory carvings that depicted scenes of classical mythology. Pandora opening her infamous box. Privacy, Lady Ashworth, is such a rare commodity these days. Rather like truth, wouldn't you agree? The Duke himself now approached, his military bearing evident in every step. His chest bore the weight of numerous medals earned in service to the crown, yet tonight those very honors seemed to burden him. Lady Blackthorn, I believe there are matters we should discuss. Away from present company. Around them, the cream of British society continued their elaborate dance of social niceties. The Countess of Pemberton, draped in sapphire velvet and pearls the size of robin's eggs, whispered urgently to the Marquis of Ravenshollow. Their hushed conversation ceased abruptly as they noticed Vesper's knowing gaze. Gentlemen, ladies, Vesper said, her voice carrying just enough to be heard over the music. How curious that so many should seek private counsel with me tonight. One might almost think there was something pressing on your collective conscience. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees, despite the roaring fireplaces that lined the walls. Servants in crisp white uniforms continued to circulate with silver trays of delicacies, oysters from the coast of Scotland, imported truffles, and champagne that had crossed the channel under the cover of diplomatic pouches. Lord Hartwell stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Lady Blackthorn, perhaps you would be interested in a business proposition? One that might prove mutually beneficial." Vesper's laughter was like the tinkling of silver bells, beautiful yet somehow ominous. "How fascinating. And what, pray tell, could you possibly offer me that I do not already possess?" "Security," came a new voice from the shadows near the grand staircase. A figure emerged, tall, imposing, dressed in black from head to toe. His face remained partially obscured, but his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. The kind of security that ensures a long and comfortable life. The threat hung in the air like smoke from the finest Turkish tobacco. Other guests began to notice the tension, conversations faltering as nervous glances were exchanged. The orchestra played on, oblivious to the drama unfolding below. Vesper studied the mysterious figure with the calculating gaze of a chess master evaluating her opponent's next move. "Security is indeed precious," she mused, closing her fan with a sharp snap. "But you see, I've always found that the most secure position is the one where truth is your strongest ally." Lady Ashworth's composure cracked slightly, a tremor visible in her diamond-adorned hands. "Lady Blackthorn, surely you understand the delicate nature of certain information? Some secrets are meant to remain buried." "Buried?" Vesper repeated, savoring the word. "Like bodies in a graveyard? How poetic. But you see, my dear Lady Ashworth, graves have a terrible habit of giving up their secrets, especially when the rain is heavy and the ground is soft." The Duke's face had gone ashen beneath his perfectly groomed beard. Around them, the evening's festivities continued, but the air crackled with tension that even the most oblivious guests could not ignore. As the clock on the mantelpiece struck 9, its chimes echoing through the vast ballroom, Vesper reached into her silk reticule and withdrew a small, leather-bound journal. The book was unremarkable in appearance, yet the way every powerful figure in the room focused on it suggested it contained enough explosive information to reshape the very foundations of British society. "This little book," she said softly, "contains the most fascinating collection of observations. Dates, times, places. Names that would make even the Archbishop of Canterbury blush. Would you like to hear just one small excerpt?" The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of carriages on cobblestones and the crackling of logs in the fireplace. But as Lady Vesper opened the journal, her fingers poised to reveal secrets that could destroy reputations and topple empires. The mysterious figure in black took a step forward, and his hand moved toward his coat. What dark revelation lay within those pages, and who would stop at nothing to ensure it never saw the light of dawn? The mysterious figure's hand halted mere inches from his coat as Lady Vesper's sharp gaze met his through the shadowed room. The pause stretched like a taut violin string, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Around them, the oblivious orchestra continued their melodic performance, but to those who knew how to read the subtle language of power, the very air thrummed with danger. "Before you consider any precipitous actions," Vesper said, her voice carrying the refined authority of one born to command, "you might wish to know that several copies of this journal already rest in the hands of trusted associates. Time-delayed revelations, you might say. Insurance against any unfortunate accidents that might befall me." Lord Hartwell's composure finally cracked, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool October evening. "Lady Blackthorn, you must understand. The information you possess could destabilize the very foundations of—" "Of what, Lord Hartwell?" Vesper interrupted smoothly, her fan now closed and tapping against her silk-gloved palm, in a rhythm that seemed to match the racing heartbeats of those around her. "Of your carefully constructed lies? Of the facade that allows certain members of our esteemed society to sleep peacefully in their Egyptian cotton sheets while others suffer the consequences of their indiscretions." The Duke of Ashworth stepped forward, his military training evident in the way he moved. Calculated, purposeful, yet betraying the desperation that gnawed at his composure like acid on fine silver. "Name your price, Lady Blackthorn. Anything within reason." Vesper's laughter was like champagne bubbles rising to the surface, effervescent yet sharp. "Within reason? How delightfully limiting. Tell me, Your Grace, what exactly constitutes reason when discussing the systematic betrayal of Her Majesty's trust?" Lady Ashworth's fan fluttered nervously, creating small gusts of air that stirred the ostrich feathers adorning her elaborate coiffure. The diamonds at her throat caught the light as she swallowed hard, her usual aristocratic poise crumbling like ancient parchment. "Lady Blackthorn, perhaps if you understood the full context." "Oh, but I do understand the context, Lady Ashworth." Vesper's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, yet it carried to every ear straining to hear. "I understand that while brave young men died in the mud of foreign battlefields, certain individuals were making fortunes selling inferior ammunition to our own forces. I understand that medical supplies meant for our wounded soldiers were diverted to private warehouses and sold to the highest bidder. And I understand that the profits from these transactions funded rather comfortable lifestyles here in London." The color drained from every face within hearing distance. The Countess of Pemberton's champagne glass slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering against the marble floor with a sound like breaking bones. The crystal fragments caught the gaslight, creating a constellation of sharp reflections that seemed to mirror the fractured loyalties in the room. Servants rushed to clean the mess, their trained efficiency a stark contrast to the paralysis that had gripped their social betters. The butler, a man whose family had served the Ashworth lineage for 3 generations, moved with practiced invisibility, yet even he could not ignore the toxic atmosphere that had settled over the gathering like a plague. "You have no proof," the mysterious figure finally spoke, his voice emerging from the shadows like smoke from a funeral pyre. "Accusations without evidence are merely gossip." Vesper's smile was radiant and terrible. "Evidence? Oh, my dear shadow dweller, I have something far more valuable than mere evidence. I have witnesses. Living, breathing witnesses who can testify to every transaction, every bribe, every moment when duty was sold to the highest bidder." She opened her journal again, and this time no one dared to stop her. The pages rustled like autumn leaves as she found the entry she sought. "Shall I read from the testimony of Captain William Morrison? The man you all left to die in that fever-ridden prison rather than risk exposure of your scheme." The Duke's hand moved instinctively to his chest, where his medals suddenly felt like weights of shame rather than honors of service. "Morrison is dead. Has been for 2 years." "Is he?" Vesper's eyes glittered with malicious delight. "How fascinating that you should be so certain. One might almost think you had personal knowledge of his fate." Lady Ashworth clutched her husband's arm, her diamond bracelet catching the light as her hands trembled. "This is madness. Pure madness. Captain Morrison died of tropical fever. Everyone knows that." "Everyone knows what they were told to know," Vesper corrected gently. "But you see, Captain Morrison had a rather inconvenient habit of keeping detailed records. Dates, signatures, payment amounts. Even copies of certain correspondence that bear very familiar letterheads." The mysterious figure stepped closer to the light, revealing a face that was both aristocratic and brutal. The kind of man who might order executions over breakfast and attend church services in the afternoon without a tremor of conscience. "Lady Blackthorn, you are playing a very dangerous game." "Am I?" Vesper closed the journal with deliberate slowness, each movement calculated to increase the tension in the room. "I prefer to think of it as justice delayed, but not denied." Lord Hartwell wiped his brow with a silk handkerchief that bore the royal crest, an ironic reminder of the loyalty he had so thoroughly betrayed. "What do you want? Money? Property? A title?" "How pedestrian," Vesper sighed. "Do you truly believe that someone who possesses information capable of toppling governments would be satisfied with such mundane rewards?" The orchestra concluded their piece with a flourish, and in the brief silence that followed, The tension in the room seemed to crystallize like frost on window glass. Then, as if summoned by the moment's dramatic potential, a new piece began. A haunting melody in a minor key that seemed to underscore the gravity of the situation. Vesper moved through the assembled conspirators like a queen reviewing her subjects, her emerald gown trailing behind her with regal authority. Each person she passed seemed to shrink slightly, as if her very presence reminded them of their diminished circumstances. "You see," she continued, her voice carrying the musical quality that had made her one of the most sought-after conversationalists in London society, "I want something far more precious than gold or gemstones. I want acknowledgement. I want the truth to be told, consequences be damned." "The truth would destroy innocent people," Lady Ashworth pleaded, her composure now completely shattered. "Think of the families, the children who would suffer." "Think of the families," Vesper interrupted, her voice suddenly sharp as a blade. "Of the soldiers who died because you sold them faulty ammunition. Think of the children who will never see their fathers again because you chose profit over duty." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the ornate clock and the distant sound of London traffic filtering through the heavy velvet curtains. Each tick seemed to count down to an inevitable reckoning that had been years in the making. The mysterious figure reached into his coat again, and this time his hand emerged holding not a weapon, but a leather pouch that clinked with the unmistakable sound of gold coins. £1,000,000, he said simply. "Enough to live like an empress for the rest of your days." Vesper examined the pouch with the detached interest of a collector appraising a moderately interesting artifact. £1,000,000, she mused. "Do you know what Captain Morrison's widow received as compensation for her husband's death from fever? £50 and a letter of condolence signed by a clerk." The weight of that comparison settled over the room like a shroud. Even the servants seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere, moving with increased caution as they continued their duties. But as Vesper reached for the pouch, her fingers brushing against the soft leather, a commotion erupted from the entrance hall. The sound of multiple carriages arriving at speed, their wheels clattering against cobblestones with urgent purpose. Who had arrived at this crucial moment, and would their presence save the conspirators or seal their doom forever? The great doors of Whitmore House burst open with a force that rattled the crystal in the chandeliers above. The sound of military boots on marble echoed through the entrance hall like thunder before a storm, and Lady Vesper's smile transformed from one of predatory satisfaction to something far more complex. Anticipation mixed with the faintest hint of concern. Colonel James Thornfield strode into the ballroom, his scarlet uniform immaculate despite the urgency of his arrival. Behind him marched 6 of Her Majesty's finest, their rifles at the ready, their faces bearing the grim determination of men who had seen too much death to fear it now. The colonel's steel-gray eyes swept the assembled aristocrats with the precision of a military assessment, cataloging threats and measuring loyalties in an instant. "Lady Blackthorne," Colonel Thornfield said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "By order of Her Majesty Queen Victoria, you are requested to surrender any documents pertaining to military contracts dated between March 1845 and October 1847. The mysterious figure in black melted back into the shadows with the fluid grace of someone well-versed in avoiding official scrutiny. Lord Hartwell's face had gone the color of parchment, while the Duke of Ashworth drew himself up to his full height, military bearing competing with obvious terror. "Colonel Thornfield," the Duke said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands, "this is highly irregular. Lady Blackthorne is a guest in my home, and she is entitled to certain protections under the laws of hospitality." Vesper's laughter was like silver bells in a winter wind. "How touching, Your Grace! Such concern for my welfare. One might almost forget that 20 minutes ago you were offering to purchase my silence." Colonel Thornfield's expression remained impassive, but his eyes sharpened with interest. "Is that so, Your Grace? How illuminating." The leather pouch of gold coins lay forgotten on a nearby table, its contents spilling across the polished mahogany surface like scattered stars. Lady Ashworth stared at the coins with the fascination of someone watching their entire world crumble into dust. "Colonel," Vesper said, moving toward him with the fluid grace of a dancer, her emerald gown catching the light with each step. "How delightful to see you again. I trust Captain Morrison's widow received my letter." The subtle emphasis on Morrison's name sent visible shockwaves through the assembled conspirators. Colonel Thornfield's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a reaction that did not escape Vesper's notice. "Captain Morrison's death was a tragedy," the colonel replied carefully. "Tropical fever claims too many good men." "Indeed," Vesper agreed, her tone deceptively light. "Though I've heard that some fevers are more convenient than others." The Duke stepped forward, desperation making him bold. "Colonel Thornfield, surely you cannot believe the wild accusations of someone who openly admits to trafficking in gossip and innuendo." "Wild accusations?" Vesper's voice rose just enough to carry to every corner of the ballroom. The orchestra, sensing the charged atmosphere, gradually allowed their music to fade until only the soft scraping of violin bows provided a haunting underscore to the unfolding drama. She opened her journal once more, and this time she began to read in clear, carrying tones that left no room for misinterpretation. March 15, 1845. Payment of £3,000 to Hartwell Industries for 30,000 rounds of ammunition. Delivery confirmed by Captain Morrison. Quality inspection report. Powder charges insufficient. Projectiles poorly cast. Estimated failure rate 30%. Lord Hartwell sank into a nearby chair, his face buried in his hands. "My God," he whispered. "My God, what have we done? You have betrayed the very men who depended on you for their lives." Vesper continued remorselessly. April 22, 1845. Captain Morrison requests investigation into ammunition failures. Request denied by Duke of Ashworth. Reason given: insufficient evidence to warrant disruption of established supply chains. Colonel Thornfield's soldiers shifted slightly, their hands moving closer to their weapons. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees as the full scope of the conspiracy began to emerge. June 3, 1845. Vesper read on, her voice growing stronger with each revelation. Captain Morrison threatens to report ammunition defects directly to the War Office. Response: transfer to India. Effective immediately. Personal note from Duke of Ashworth: some problems are best solved at a distance. Lady Ashworth let out a strangled sob, her diamond tiara glittering as she shook her head in denial. "We never meant for anyone to die. It was supposed to be a simple matter of efficiency. The war was ending. The contracts were already signed." "Efficiency," Colonel Thornfield repeated, his voice deadly quiet. "Is that what you call it when 37 men died at the Battle of Mudkey because their ammunition failed to fire?" The Duke's military bearing finally cracked completely. He aged 10 years in the space of a heartbeat, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his crimes. "We couldn't have known." "But you did know," Vesper interrupted, turning to a new page in her journal. "Because Captain Morrison wrote to you personally. I have his letters, Your Grace. All of them, including the one where he begged you to recall the defective ammunition before it could cost more lives." She read in Morrison's own words, preserved in Vesper's meticulous handwriting. "Your Grace, I implore you to reconsider the contracts with Hartwell Industries. 3 more men died yesterday when their muskets misfired. These are not random failures. This is systematic negligence that borders on treason." The word treason hung in the air like a death sentence. Colonel Thornfield's hand moved to his sword hilt, a gesture that was both unconscious and deeply significant. "And your response?" Vesper continued, her voice now carrying the weight of absolute moral authority. "Your response was to arrange for Captain Morrison's transfer to the most disease-ridden posting in the entire empire. But even that wasn't enough, was it? Because Morrison was too honorable to simply forget what he had witnessed. The mysterious figure in black stepped forward again, desperation making him careless. Lady Blackthorn, you have made your point. Name your price and let us end this circus. Vesper closed the journal with a snap that echoed like a gunshot. My price? My price is justice, you shadow-dwelling merchant of death. Justice for Captain Morrison. Justice for the 37 men who died at Mudkey. Justice for every soldier who trusted that his country would provide him with the tools to defend his life and honor. Colonel Thornfield stepped forward, his soldiers moving with him in perfect synchronization. Lady Blackthorn, I must ask you again to surrender those documents. They are evidence in a criminal investigation. Criminal investigation? Lord Hartwell looked up with desperate hope. Colonel, surely we can reach some accommodation. The only accommodation, Colonel Thornfield said with finality, will be made by a military tribunal. Lord Hartwell, Duke of Ashworth, you are under arrest for treason, conspiracy, and conspiracy to commit murder. But as the soldiers moved to apprehend the conspirators, the mysterious figure in black drew a pistol from his coat, its polished barrel gleaming in the gaslight. With weapons drawn and justice hanging in the balance, who would survive the night, and what final secret would determine the fate of them all? The pistol's deadly gleam caught the light from the crystal chandeliers above, casting fractured rainbows across the mysterious figure's pale features. In that frozen moment, with death poised between trigger and target, Lady Vesper exhibited the calm that had made her legendary in London's most dangerous social circles. How tedious, she sighed, not even deigning to step back from the weapon's aim. Violence is always the refuge of the unimaginative. Tell me, do you truly believe that killing me here, in front of Colonel Thornfield and 6 of Her Majesty's finest, will somehow resolve your predicament? The figure's hand trembled almost imperceptibly, the first crack in his composure that anyone had witnessed. You have destroyed everything. Decades of careful planning, networks that span 3 continents, resources that were built on the graves of better men, Colonel Thornfield interrupted, his own weapon now drawn with military precision. Lower your pistol, sir. Now. But the mysterious figure's eyes never left Vesper's face. You have no idea what forces you are meddling with, Lady Blackthorn. The contracts you seek to expose were merely the surface of something far larger, far more necessary. Vesper's fan snapped open again, revealing those intricate ivory carvings of Pandora's box. How delicious! A conspiracy within a conspiracy. Do tell us more about these larger forces. The Duke of Ashworth, desperate to deflect attention from his own crimes, found his voice. Colonel Thornfield, this man is not what he appears. He approached us months ago, claimed to represent certain interests within the government itself. Silence! The figure snarled, his pistol swinging toward the Duke. You weak-minded fool. You understand nothing of what we've accomplished. Lady Ashworth pressed herself against the marble pillar, her diamonds catching the light as she trembled. He said it was for the good of the Empire, that some sacrifices were necessary to maintain our position against the French, against the Russians. Vesper moved closer to the armed figure, her emerald gown rustling like silk against steel. And you believed him? How charmingly naive. Tell me, what did he promise you? Titles? Land? Or merely the assurance that your own past indiscretions would remain buried? Lord Hartwell raised his head from his hands, his face streaked with tears that had ruined his carefully waxed mustache. He knew about the gambling debts, the money I'd taken from the regimental funds to cover my losses at White's. He said this arrangement would solve everything. And it would have, the figure said through gritted teeth, if not for one inconveniently moral sea captain and one meddlesome woman with delusions of righteousness. Colonel Thornfield stepped closer, his soldiers maintaining their positions with the discipline that had made the British Army feared across 3 continents. Who do you represent? What ministry? What department? The figure's laugh was like breaking glass. Ministry? Department? How quaint. Colonel, There are powers in this world that transcend the neat little boxes of government bureaucracy, powers that recognize that sometimes the ends justify any means necessary. Vesper studied the man with the analytical gaze of someone who had spent years reading the subtle tells of human nature. You're not British at all, are you? That accent, refined, certainly, but there's something underneath. Something that speaks of colder climates and harder choices. For the first time, genuine surprise flickered across the figure's features. Observant. As expected. Russian, she continued with satisfaction. Oh, how perfectly delicious. Here I thought we were dealing with mere domestic corruption, and instead we have uncovered a web of international espionage. Tell me, are you Okrana? Or something even more unofficial? The admission hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. Colonel Thornfield's expression hardened to granite as the implications became clear. You've been feeding intelligence to foreign agents. Through the ammunition contracts. Through Morrison's reports. Morrison discovered the pattern, Vesper explained, opening her journal to a new section filled with detailed diagrams and notations. He realized that the delivery schedules coincided with Russian troop movements on the frontier. Every failed ammunition shipment was preceded by enemy repositioning that suggested advanced knowledge of British capabilities. The Duke of Ashworth sank to his knees, the full weight of his betrayal finally crushing his aristocratic pride. Dear God, we weren't just stealing from our own soldiers. We were. You were providing intelligence that allowed enemy forces to maximize British casualties, Vesper finished with clinical precision. Every man who died because of faulty ammunition was killed twice. Once by defective equipment, and again by enemy forces who knew exactly when and where to strike. Lady Ashworth's scream of anguish echoed through the ballroom, drowning out even the orchestra's continued playing. The musicians, trained to provide background ambience regardless of circumstances, had maintained their performance throughout the entire confrontation, creating a surreal soundtrack to the unfolding catastrophe. The Russian agent's composure finally shattered completely. You understand nothing. The balance of power in Europe hangs by threads. Sometimes those threads must be cut to prevent greater catastrophes. And who appointed you to make such decisions? Colonel Thornfield demanded, his weapon never wavering from its target. History, the agent replied with fanatic certainty. History and the recognition that weak nations fall while strong ones endure. Your empire's decay was inevitable. We merely accelerated the process. Vesper moved with fluid grace to the spilled gold coins, her silk-gloved fingers trailing through the scattered wealth like a duchess examining jewelry. 1 million pounds, she mused. Tell me, how many British lives does that represent in your calculations? What is the going rate for betraying one's country these days? Those men would have died anyway, the agent snarled. In different battles, under different circumstances. At least their deaths served a larger purpose. Whose purpose? Vesper's voice cut through the air like a blade. Yours? Your master's in St. Petersburg? Or perhaps someone even closer to home? She opened her journal to its final section. Pages that had remained hidden throughout the evening's revelations. You see, I've been conducting my own investigation into the larger conspiracy you've mentioned. And what I discovered is that the rot extends far deeper than mere war profiteering. Colonel Thornfield tensed as Vesper's fingers found a new set of entries. Lady Blackthorn, what else have you uncovered? Names, she said simply. Names of British officials who have been receiving Russian gold for years. Names of parliamentarians who have voted against military appropriations at precisely the moments when such votes would benefit enemy planning. Names of. The Russian agent's finger tightened on the trigger as desperation overcame calculation. But as he prepared to fire, a new voice spoke from the entrance to the ballroom, a voice that carried such absolute authority that even armed men froze at its sound. I think that will be quite enough theatrics for one evening. Every eye turned toward the speaker, and what they saw made blood freeze in aristocratic veins. Standing in the doorway, flanked by a phalanx of the Queen's Guard, was a figure whose presence changed everything, who possessed such power that their very appearance could stop bullets and topple empires, and what final revelation would reshape the fate of everyone in that gilded room. Prince Albert himself stood in the doorway, his presence transforming the opulent ballroom into something resembling a throne room where judgment would be passed. The prince consort's usually gentle features were set in lines of granite determination, and behind him stood not merely soldiers, but the personal guard of Queen Victoria herself, men whose loyalty to the crown superseded all other considerations. The Russian agent's pistol lowered slowly, not from surrender but from the simple recognition that he was now vastly outnumbered by forces that would show no mercy to enemies of the realm. The game had escalated beyond anything he had anticipated, and even his considerable training had not prepared him for the direct intervention of the royal family. "Your Royal Highness," Colonel Thornfield said, snapping to attention with military precision. "We were not expecting." "Were you not, Colonel?" Prince Albert's accent carried the precise diction of someone who had learned English as a second language, but mastered it completely. "How curious. I was under the impression that Her Majesty's intelligence services were somewhat more comprehensive in their communications." Lady Vesper performed a perfect curtsy, her emerald gown pooling around her like liquid jewels. When she rose, her eyes held a glimmer of something that might have been vindication. "Your Royal Highness honors us with his presence, though I suspect this is not entirely a social call." "Indeed not, Lady Blackthorn." Prince Albert moved into the ballroom with measured steps, his dark coat a stark contrast to the glittering finery around him. "We have been monitoring this situation for some time. Your investigations have proven most illuminating." The Duke of Ashworth struggled to his feet, his military training demanding that he show proper respect to royalty even as his world crumbled around him. "Your Royal Highness, I can explain." "Can you, Your Grace?" Prince Albert's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Can you explain how a man who swore an oath of loyalty to the crown came to betray that trust for Russian gold? Can you explain how the deaths of British soldiers became acceptable collateral damage in your pursuit of personal profit?" Lord Hartwell remained slumped in his chair, broken by the magnitude of his exposure. "We never meant for it to go so far. It started as simple contracts, a way to manage certain financial difficulties." "Financial difficulties," Prince Albert repeated with icy precision. "Is that how you characterize treason, Lord Hartwell? As a financial difficulty?" Lady Ashworth pressed herself against the marble pillar, her diamonds now seeming more like shackles than adornments. "Your Royal Highness, surely mercy." "Mercy?" The prince consort's voice rose slightly, carrying to every corner of the vast ballroom. "Tell me, Lady Ashworth, where was your mercy when Captain Morrison begged for your husband to reconsider the defective ammunition contracts? Where was your mercy when young soldiers died because their weapons failed at the crucial moment?" The Russian agent watched this royal condemnation with calculating eyes, clearly assessing his chances of escape. But Prince Albert's attention turned to him with laser focus. "And you, sir, represent a particular kind of evil that transcends mere treason. You are the corruption that turns loyal men into traitors, the poison that seeps into the foundations of nations. What is your name?" The agent straightened, finding some final reserve of professional pride. "I am Colonel Dmitry Volkov of the 3rd Section. I do not recognize the authority of this court." "This court?" Prince Albert's smile was colder than a London winter. "You misunderstand your situation, Colonel Volkov. This is not a court. This is an execution chamber." At these words, the Queen's Guard stepped forward in perfect unison, their weapons trained on the Russian with unwavering precision. Volkov's hand tightened on his pistol, but he was clearly calculating odds that were no longer in his favor. Lady Vesper moved through this tableau of royal justice with the grace of someone who had anticipated this moment. "Your Royal Highness, if I may be so bold, there is one more revelation that might interest you." "Speak, Lady Blackthorn." Your service to the crown this evening has earned you considerable latitude. Vesper opened her journal to its very last page, where a single name was written in careful script. Colonel Volkov did not act alone in his recruitment of British traitors. He had assistance from someone within our own government. Someone with access to the highest levels of military planning. Prince Albert's expression darkened further. If such a thing were possible. Name them. Lord Chancellor Pemberton, Vesper said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. He provided Volkov with the names of officials who might be amenable to financial persuasion. In exchange, he received advance warning of Russian diplomatic initiatives. A collective gasp rose from the assembled aristocrats. Lord Chancellor Pemberton was one of the most trusted advisors to the crown. A man whose loyalty had never been questioned. Impossible, Colonel Thornfield breathed. The Lord Chancellor has served faithfully for over 20 years. Has he? Prince Albert's voice carried a terrible certainty. Lady Blackthorn, what evidence do you possess? Vesper withdrew a sealed letter from her journal. Its red wax bearing an unmistakable seal. A letter from Pemberton to Colonel Volkov, discussing the management of Captain Morrison. Written 3 days before Morrison was transferred to India. Prince Albert examined the letter with the careful attention of someone trained in statecraft. His face grew progressively darker as he read. This correspondence discusses Morrison as an obstacle to be removed, and suggests that permanent solutions might be necessary. Colonel Volkov's composure finally cracked. You cannot prove anything from a single letter. Pemberton was a useful fool, nothing more. Was he? Vesper's smile held no warmth. Then perhaps you can explain this. She produced a second document, a bank draft bearing Pemberton's signature, made out to an account in Switzerland for the sum of £50,000. Payment for services rendered, dated 1 week after Captain Morrison's death from tropical fever. The silence that followed was broken only by the ticking of the ornate clock and the distant sound of London traffic. Even the orchestra had finally ceased their playing, sensing that the drama unfolding before them had reached its climax. Prince Albert folded the documents carefully and handed them to Colonel Thornfield. Colonel, you will arrest Lord Chancellor Pemberton immediately. He is to be held in the Tower pending trial for high treason. Your Royal Highness, Thornfield replied. It will be done. Colonel Volkov made his decision in that moment, raising his pistol toward Prince Albert with desperate speed. But before he could fire, Lady Vesper moved with surprising agility, her ivory fan striking his wrist with enough force to send the weapon clattering across the marble floor. Did you truly think, she said as the Queen's Guard swarmed the Russian agent, that I would spend an entire evening in a room with a dangerous man without taking precautions? That fan has been weighted with lead shots since the moment I arrived. As Colonel Volkov was dragged away in chains, his final words echoed through the ballroom. This changes nothing. The rot goes deeper than you know. Deeper than. His voice was cut off as the guard dragged him from the room, but his warning hung in the air like a curse. Prince Albert turned to the assembled conspirators with the finality of royal judgment. Duke of Ashworth, Lord Hartwell, Lady Ashworth, you will be tried for treason and conspiracy to commit murder. The Crown's mercy is not infinite, and your betrayal of the men who served under you is unforgivable. But as the traitors were led away in chains and the ballroom began to empty, Lady Vesper noticed something that chilled her blood. A second figure in the shadows, one who had remained unnoticed throughout the entire confrontation. Who else had been watching from the darkness, and what final threat to the crown remained hidden in the shadows of Whitmore House? The figure in the shadows moved with the silence of someone trained in the art of invisibility, but Lady Vesper's keen eyes, sharpened by years of observing human nature in its most unguarded moments, caught the subtle displacement of darkness near the servants' entrance. As Prince Albert concluded his pronouncement of justice, and the last of the conspirators was led away in chains, she realized that the deadliest player in this game had yet to be revealed. Your Royal Highness, she said quietly, her voice carrying just enough to reach the prince consort's ears without alerting the figure in the shadows. "I believe our evening's entertainment is not yet concluded." Prince Albert followed her gaze with the practiced subtlety of someone who had survived numerous assassination attempts. His hand moved almost imperceptibly toward the ceremonial sword at his side, a weapon that, despite its ornamental appearance, was kept razor-sharp for precisely such occasions. The figure emerged from the shadows with liquid grace, revealing features that were aristocratic, feminine, and utterly without mercy. Lady Catherine Pemberton, wife of the now doomed Lord Chancellor, stood before them in a gown of midnight blue silk that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her dark hair was dressed with sapphires that caught the gaslight like captured stars, and her smile held the cold beauty of a winter morning. "Lady Pemberton," Prince Albert said with careful neutrality, "how unexpected to find you here this evening. Is it Your Royal Highness?" Lady Catherine's voice carried the musical quality of someone trained in the finest finishing schools, yet underneath lay something that spoke of steel and poison. "I was under the impression that wives were expected to support their husbands in times of difficulty." Lady Vesper studied the newcomer with the calculating gaze that had made her reputation. "Support, Lady Pemberton? Or perhaps, direction?" The question hung in the air like incense at a funeral mass, heavy with implication. Lady Catherine's smile never wavered, but something shifted in her dark eyes, a flicker of recognition that the game had entered its final phase. "How perceptive," Lady Catherine said with genuine admiration. "I had heard that Lady Vesper Blackthorn possessed an uncommonly sharp mind. The rumors, it seems, were understated." Colonel Thornfield, who had remained to oversee the transfer of prisoners, now stepped forward with military alertness. "Lady Pemberton, you are required to accompany us for questioning regarding your husband's activities." "Required?" Lady Catherine's laughter was like silver bells tolling midnight. "By whom, Colonel? And under what authority?" "By the authority of the Crown," Prince Albert said firmly. "Your husband stands accused of high treason. It is inevitable that his closest associates will be examined." "Associates?" Lady Catherine repeated thoughtfully. "What a charmingly inadequate term. Tell me, Your Royal Highness, what do you call the person who conceives a plan, recruits the participants, and orchestrates every detail of its execution?" The implication struck the assembled group like lightning. Lady Vesper's fan snapped open again, revealing those ivory carvings of Pandora's box, Pandora herself now seeming to wear Lady Catherine's face. "You," Vesper breathed. "It was never Pemberton. Never Volkov. It was you all along." Lady Catherine's curtsy was perfect in its execution, a mockery of respect that somehow conveyed absolute contempt. "Lady Blackthorn, your reputation for perception is clearly well-deserved. Though I must say, it took you rather longer than I expected to reach that conclusion." Prince Albert's hand tightened on his sword hilt. "Lady Pemberton, you will surrender yourself to the Crown's custody immediately." "Will I?" Lady Catherine's tone remained conversational, as if discussing the weather rather than treason. "Tell me, Your Royal Highness, what exactly do you believe you can prove? That my husband received money from Russian agents? That he facilitated the sale of defective ammunition? All quite true, and all quite damningly documented in Lady Blackthorn's remarkably thorough investigation." She paused, savoring the moment like fine wine. "But none of that proves I was involved. After all, I am merely a wife. A devoted, loyal wife who had no knowledge of her husband's extracurricular activities." Lady Vesper opened her journal one final time, turning to a section she had kept hidden throughout the entire evening. "Except for this," she said quietly. The document she withdrew was different from the others, older, written in a feminine hand that matched the samples of Lady Catherine's correspondence that Vesper had somehow acquired. It was a letter addressed to Colonel Volkov, but written 2 years before his first documented contact with Lord Pemberton. "A proposal," Vesper read aloud, For the systematic weakening of British military capabilities through the corruption of supply chains and intelligence networks. Submitted for the consideration of His Imperial Majesty's Intelligence Services. Signed, Catherine Elizabeth Pemberton, née Volkov. The revelation hit the room like an artillery shell. Lady Catherine was not merely connected to the Russian agent, she was his sister. How delightfully thorough, Lady Catherine said, her composure remaining perfect despite the exposure. Though I must point out that correspondence predating official hostilities could hardly be considered treasonous. After all, communication between family members is hardly uncommon. Even when that communication includes detailed plans for the murder of British officers? Prince Albert's voice carried the full weight of royal authority. Lady Catherine's smile finally faltered. Murder is such an ugly word, Your Royal Highness. I prefer to think of it as strategic pruning. Captain Morrison was entirely too honest for his own good. And for ours. Colonel Thornfield stepped forward, but Lady Catherine raised a delicate hand that somehow conveyed more threat than any weapon. Before you take any precipitous action, Colonel, you might wish to consider the current location of a certain package. A package containing documents that would prove embarrassing to several members of Parliament. Documents that are currently in the possession of associates who have been instructed to deliver them to the time should anything unfortunate befall me. What documents? Prince Albert demanded. Lady Catherine's smile returned, cold and triumphant. Evidence of who knew what and when. Evidence of which officials received warnings about Russian intelligence activities, but chose to ignore them for reasons of political convenience. Evidence that would show the Crown itself was informed of suspicious activities months before taking action. The threat was clear. Even in defeat, Lady Catherine held cards that could damage the monarchy itself. But Lady Vesper stepped forward, her own smile now matching Lady Catherine's for coldness. How fascinating, Vesper said. You're referring, I assume, to the documents you hid in the vault at Rothschild's bank? The ones you believed were safely beyond anyone's reach. Lady Catherine's composure cracked for the first time. How could you possibly know about them? Vesper's fan closed with a sharp snap. Because I retrieved them 3 days ago. Amazing what one can accomplish with the right connections and a talent for persuasion. She produced a final leather portfolio from her seemingly inexhaustible collection of evidence. Every document you thought would protect you is now in the hands of the Crown. Your insurance policy has become your death warrant. Lady Catherine's mask of aristocratic composure finally shattered completely, revealing the calculating intelligence beneath. For a moment, her resemblance to her brother Colonel Volkov was unmistakable. You meddlesome witch, she snarled, her refined accent slipping to reveal something harder underneath. Do you have any idea what you've done? The delicate balance we were maintaining. The balance between order and chaos. Prince Albert interrupted. Between loyalty and treason? Between justice and corruption? That balance, Lady Pemberton, was always an illusion. As the Queen's Guard moved to arrest the last conspirator, Lady Catherine made one final desperate gambit. Her hand moved to the sapphire brooch at her throat. A brooch that concealed a small but deadly blade poisoned with enough toxin to kill half the people in the room. But Lady Vesper had anticipated even this. Her weighted fan struck Lady Catherine's wrist with surgical precision, sending the poisoned blade clattering harmlessly across the marble floor. Did you truly believe, Vesper said as the guard secured Lady Catherine in chains, that someone who had spent years studying the habits of dangerous people would not recognize the signs of a concealed weapon? As dawn began to break over London, casting golden light through the tall windows of Whitmore House, the last of the conspirators was led away. The ballroom, which had witnessed such elegant treachery just hours before, now stood empty except for Prince Albert, Lady Vesper, and the weight of justice finally served. Lady Blackthorn, Prince Albert said as the first rays of sunlight illuminated the scattered gold coins that still lay forgotten on the mahogany table. The Crown owes you a debt that can never be fully repaid. Vesper smiled, but it was a different smile now. one touched with sadness for the lives lost and the innocence shattered. Justice served as payment enough, Your Royal Highness, though I suspect Captain Morrison's widow might appreciate a more tangible recognition of her husband's sacrifice. Indeed, Prince Albert agreed. The Crown's gratitude will be expressed in ways both public and private. As they prepared to leave the scene of that remarkable night, Lady Vesper paused at the table where the Russian gold still lay scattered. She selected a single coin and held it up to catch the morning light. The price of silence, she mused. £1,000,000 to keep quiet about treason and murder. Yet in the end, the truth proved far more valuable than all the gold in the empire. She let the coin fall back among its companions with a small, metallic sound that seemed to echo through the empty ballroom like a bell tolling for the dead. And as they walked out into the London morning, where honest merchants were beginning their daily trade and children played in the squares, the shadows of conspiracy finally lifted from the empire. The gossip that had once whispered through drawing rooms now became the honest testimony that would ensure justice for the fallen and security for the realm. Lady Vesper Blackthorne, known to some as a mere purveyor of social intrigue, had proven that sometimes the most dangerous weapon in a kingdom is not a sword or a cannon, but the unwavering determination to ensure that truth, no matter how painful, will always find its way to the light. For in the end, secrets buried in aristocratic soil have a terrible habit of taking root, growing into scandals that can topple empires, unless tended by a gardener bold enough to pull them from the earth and expose them to the purifying light of justice.